1980. A young boy called Danny stood in his bathroom, talking to Tony, the little boy who lives in his head. They're talking about Danny's dad moving him and his family to an isolated hotel in the mountains called the Overlook. Tony isn't keen on moving to the hotel. He thinks there's something bad there. Danny asks him why, so Tony shows him. Danny sees a strange, queasy mix of images flash into his head, just like pictures in a book. He sees a number, 237. He sees a door with the word Red Rum scrawled in blood. He sees two little girls stood side by side staring right back at him. And he sees a pair of elevator doors open and a tidal wave of blood pour out, drenching everything in sight. It's been nearly 40 years since Stanley Kubrick made The Shining, and audiences first saw these strange images on the big screen, and yet they still feel as shocking, disorientating and unique as ever. Kubrick had already pushed what was possible on screen with visionary movies like 2001, and had sparked shock, outrage and controversy with movies like A Clockwork Orange. But when he decided to make his own genre movie, a haunted house movie based on a Stephen King novel, he somehow managed to make the most iconic, most puzzling and most debated over horror movie in all of cinema history. One that fans still discuss, still analyse, still argue over and are still traumatised by today. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story and try and unpick the labyrinthine puzzle box that is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
What about 1237?
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is part 6, where, as that intro suggested, we're going to be exploring Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Now, this is one of those movies that is almost impossible to cover every single element of the film, but we try our very best. In fact, this week, I'm joined by 2 different guests, both of which are going to discuss the movie with me at length. The first half of the podcast, the first chat, is going to be a fairly spoiler-free review, a sort of vague discussion around the inception of the movie and the filming of it. And then the latter half of the podcast, I'll be joined by another host, and we're going to delve a bit more into it, a bit more of the nitty-gritty, and try and figure out exactly what's going on in this movie, and particularly what the hell is happening at the end. So lots of stuff to cover. Now, before we get started, don't forget, you can get in touch with us in a number of different ways. You can email. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, it's @evolutionpod, or on Facebook, that's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And don't forget, if you want to keep up to date with what movies we're going to be reviewing week by week in spoilerific detail so that you can watch the movies yourself, please do subscribe and follow on Letterboxd. That's where you can find the list of films which gets updated weekly. So that's letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. Don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use. And if you get a chance, drop us a little rating or review. Ideally a 5-star one, and if you do, I will give you a little shout out as a thank you. So stay tuned for the end of the show when I'll be giving everyone who's left me a review in the last couple of weeks a big thank you. Now, later on, for our spoilerific discussion, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Louise Blain of Games Radar, SFX, Horrorville magazine, amongst various others. So we're going to be getting into the spoilerific details of The Shining. But first of all, I've got a very, very exciting guest to introduce. Any UK listeners out there are probably familiar with the BBC's longest running film review programme. It's simply called The Film Programme, or as it's currently called right now, Film 2018. It started 47 years ago when it was filmed 1971 and has been running every single year on BBC One since then. For any American listeners out there, think of this as our version of sort of Siskel and Ebert at the movies. It's had many different critics and presenters over the years, including, of course, the late, great Barry Norman. But over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, it's been the brilliant Danny Leigh who's been giving us the weekly critiques of what to see and what to avoid at the cinema. I'm very, very lucky because I've worked as a producer on the show for the last several years, so I've gotten to work with Danny, and now today he is here to join me to talk about one of his personal favourite ever movies, The Shining. Now, Danny is a very busy man, and I did manage to nab a little half hour, 45 minutes out of him to sit down and discuss the movie. So here is my chat with the brilliant Danny Leigh. Danny, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike.
This is quite a treat for me because obviously I've known you for a few years now.
We're old friends.
We're old friends, yeah, absolutely. For people that don't know, tell me a little bit about you, what you do.
I suppose the short version is I'm a film journalist, which is obviously how you and I first met.
Yeah.
I've written about film for a very long time. I write for The Guardian, for the Financial Times, for the Sight and Sound. Our paths crossed because I was the co-host of the BBC One film programme for a while.
It's always hard to know what to call that show, isn't it?
The film show?
Yeah, the film show,
programme,
film 20, whatever.
Yeah, exactly so.
Yeah, I mean, craziness. I mean, what was that like, briefly? I mean, like when suddenly getting that role and filling the shoes of Barry and Jonathan and, surreal, I bet.
It was a bit surreal. I mean, the thing is, I never really saw it as filling their shoes because obviously the nature of the show changed, whatever we call the show.
Sure.
The nature of it changed a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would have felt really enormously uncomfortable had it been put to me that, you're taking over that role.
Yeah.
I never felt I was. I mean, I was always this sort of glove puppet on the on the sofa who was sort of doing something else. I was like Basil Brush.
It was
I'd sort of pop up.
Yeah.
I wasn't the main attraction, which suited me fine.
Well, and it was a great change of format there to have that kind of live discussion element rather than the kind of.
I think when it worked.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those things. Obviously, being a live show, it was a change in format, and obviously it was live as well. And I think I had never really processed until I did it quite how odd live TV is and how it's like a sort of genre unto itself and it runs on different rules. And so the fact that our mouths kept moving most of the time and stuff came out and some of it was half coherent, that's a total result. And when it was good, I mean, as I say, that's the thing about live TV, you would have good weeks and bad weeks. And obviously also, as people will know, whenever you're talking about film or writing about film, you're hostage to the release schedule and you're hostage to the subject matter and how fascinating or not that can be. But occasionally the stars aligned. We'd have good chewy films and we'd all be on form. And
I suppose because of the nature of that programme, we were around during the awards season, covered lots of awardsy films. Not many chances to do genre films, horror movies.
Absolutely
not.
Absolutely not.
So I'm intrigued to ask first of all, what's your relationship like with the horror genre?
I'm a fan. I mean, I'm a fan. I suppose the best way to say it is that I'm a fan with a lowercase f because I see myself. I've always loved horror films. Many of my favourite films are horror movies. Horror movies, like so many people, it was kind of my way into film. Really, I think there's an argument. I think I remember seeing Scorsese say once that cinema is horror cinema. Right? You go back to the Expressionists and in Germany, and that's what it was. And it's kind of grown up around that. So I don't think you can be. I'd mistrust someone who described themselves as a film lover or a cinephile or whatever phrase they use and said that they didn't also have a huge passion for horror cinema. I don't know that I see myself as a because then there is the sort of uppercase F horror fan who defines himself firstly as a genre fan and then the rest of cinema comes after. I've always seen the two things as going hand in hand.
Absolutely, yeah. And for some reason, you're totally right, but for some reason there is kind of this snobbery about horror cinema or genre cinema with some people, isn't there? But I suppose not people that probably know what they're talking about.
Well, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, I think genre cinema generally suffers from, I mean, it's so strange. I mean, anyone who sees movies at all, I think, realises how ridiculous it is because, even very highbrow film, is going to be drawing on things from horror left, right, and centre. I mean, if you go and watch Mikhail Haneke, he's making horror movies half the time, or at least he's playing with horror movie tropes, and that's what I mean. I mean, it's very difficult to find any filmmaker, operating at any level, in terms of how films are seen culturally, who isn't themselves a horror movie fan, and isn't demonstrating that they're very conversant with horror movies, horror
totally
cinema,
And that's what's interesting about The Shining, actually, as well, obviously, which we're going to talk about, is it's got that kind of crossover, hasn't it? You've got Kubrick, at the helm of it. And do you think Kubrick set out to make, do you think he was a genre fan, Kubrick?
Well, again, I think it was that idea that Kubrick was possibly the definitive film lover. He was so besotted with film, it was almost like he made films as a product of his love of film, and he sort of spoke in film, if you see what I mean. It was almost like his first language. Everything else was secondary, and I think as a result of that, of course, he was completely conversant with and familiar with the whole history of horror cinema, and I think he also loved the idea. He was very attached to the psychological buttons that could be pressed through movies, and obviously terrifying people, scaring people is the biggest, reddest button of them all. And I think so I think he'd always, there's a quote which is attributed to him, which is from way back in the 60s, that at some point he wanted to just make the scariest movie ever made. That's the level he was operating. Well, absolutely so. And you can see there's other moments in his career where he's kind of building up to that. Clockwork Orange obviously has a lot of moments, not just because it's often a horrific film to watch, but there are sort of technical things he's doing which come from horror as well. And Clockwork Orange is a film which comes at the same time as things like Rosemary, same era as things like Rosemary's Baby. And it was a moment, I think, where horror, having been this sort of slightly disreputable genre through the 50s and 60s, at that point, very grand directors were starting to appropriate ideas, and it became okay. So I think I love Kubrick, and I think one of the things I love about him is that he marched the beat of his own drum to such an extent. I don't think he needed permission from anyone to go and make a horror movie. But it's an interesting, I certainly think at that moment, from the kind of late 60s through to 1980 when The Shining was made, horror was becoming much more socially acceptable for filmmakers to play with.
And it definitely feels like Kubrick, like you say, there's elements of horror in loads of his other films, I think. Obviously Clockwork Orange, there's even parts of 2001 that I found slightly unnerving as a child. Eyes Wide Shut, even Private Pile in Full Metal Jacket. Like all these moments, you just think it gets under your skin.
Absolutely so. This is one of the first sort of tableau that he sets up. Is I think it's Killer's Kiss. With the mannequins in New York. It's a really you twist that shot just slightly. These mannequins in a deserted warehouse, and it becomes the stuff of horror movies. And I see a lot of early Kubrick. I almost see it in terms of the tone, in terms of the shot. It kind of reminds me of something like Carnival of Souls. This incredibly kind of low budget, raw horror movie. There's something going on there under the surface where they seem like cousins to each other.
Yeah, definitely. So The Shining then. So first of all, Danny, can I ask you? I ask everyone to do this and they hate it, but give a little bit of plot synopsis of The Shining before we.
Well, The Shining is the story of. There's so many different ways to answer that question. It's the story of a man going mad at its most basic level. So it's the story of a kind of semi-legitimate writer, kind of failed writer, who takes his wife and his young son off to what is a caretaker's job, looking after a deserted ski resort hotel. And you find over the winter, and the deal being that obviously he has to stay there the entirety of the winter, and no one else can actually, it's snowbound, and no one else can actually kind of gain entry to the property. So it's just him and his family for months on end. And he obviously wants to use this as an opportunity to write his great novel. Yes. But as we discover in the course of the film, the hotel itself has a past, or at least that's one way of reading it. The other way of reading it is that the hotel is just a hotel, and that everything that we see unfolding on screen is actually just the product of him unravelling, having been unable to actually produce any kind of book, and instead, coming apart at the seams with disastrous consequences for his family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. The last few weeks we've been talking about the kind of evolution of the sort of ghost story from things like The Innocents or the William Castle movies or whatever. Do you see this as a haunted house movie, or do you see this as the story of a man with alcoholism going mad?
I think it's my honest answer is I see it as both, but I respond to it as a haunted house movie. Yeah, I respond to it as a movie about we all have, or many of us, I hope I'm not going out on a limb here, have dreams about physical spaces, about houses and properties, which are actually obviously really obvious, reflections of how we feel about our inner space, about our minds and about our sort of spirits and whatever. And it feels like and that's the part of the magic of the haunted house, as a concept. And I see it very much as that. And I respond to it very much, coming down the line from Edgar Allan Poe onwards. It's the idea of physical spaces being possessed, and being owned by other forces. There is, of course, another reading, and this is the Stephen King reading, essentially. Stephen King obviously wrote the novel and then became very unhappy with Kubrick's adaptation of it on the grounds that he saw the story essentially as the story of a man with alcoholism. Yeah. Which is, it's his work originally, so that's if anyone has the prerogative to kind of, to say what this story is about to them. It's the person who created it. But I think it's a really important principle, as with any kind of film or book or anything, that once something is created, it belongs to everybody, and so everyone can interpret it in different ways. So obviously, so Stephen King has had this long-standing enmity and issue with the film of The Shining on the basis that, to him, Kubrick turned it into a haunted house movie.
Yeah, it's so funny, but you could see it as either or. That's the beauty of it.
Absolutely. Well, it's both at once. I mean, the thing is, it is both at once, and I mean, I don't think there are various other, or there's at least one specific kind of alternate ending to the film, which suggests that. I mean, the very last thing I want to do is spoil this for anyone who hasn't seen the film. But at certain points, Kubrick, I think, was tempted to suggest that it was more in the character of Torrance, Jack Nicholson's character. It was more unfolding in his mind, and that he actually then, I think, he very diligently crafted the film and took things out after the fact to leave it very ambiguous.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember the first time you ever saw The Shining and what your reaction was?
Well, yes and no. I always, throughout, for as long as I can remember, throughout my whole adult life, I'd always laboured under the idea that I must have seen The Shining at a really inappropriately young age, because it had such a profound effect on me, and I felt very connected to it, but it also deeply unsettled me. In the way that things only do when you see them too young. And obviously I was 8 when the film came out, so I wouldn't have seen it at the cinema. But for years and years I'd sat there thinking, God, I wonder how young I was. I remember it turned up on TV, and so I was thinking, was I 11, was I 12, 13? That kind of weird adolescent phase where obviously, a lot of, the hormones are flying, and, psychologically you're in a strange place anyway. And I thought, it must have been that. But I'd never been able to pin it down. And then years later, Kubrick being Kubrick and the kind of, attracting the kind of fans he does, there is, of course, a website out there which actually detailed the broadcast dates for every Kubrick film in every different country. And I thought, oh my God, finally I've hit the motherlode. I can find out just how outrageously young I was when I was first exposed to this film, and the kind of psychological carnage that it wreaked on me afterwards. I was about 2 weeks away from turning 18, and still somehow I then, from that moment onwards, it had spoken to me so clearly that I'd obviously then processed this as this terrible childhood experience, and it hadn't been at all. I mean, I've told a couple of other people that story, and I definitely remember meeting someone who said that they watched it when they were about 10 or 11, and more to the point, that the circumstances was not them sort of sneaking downstairs, in the dead of night and turning the TV on or finding a DVD on a shelf. It was that their dad specifically had said, "Come and watch this," and they'd sat there as a 10-year-old, like with their dad, just because and you sort of step back and think, what was going on there? And they said, oh no, he just thought it was like a fun, scary movie. I mean, again, it comes back to that idea we were just talking about. That what is The Shining? Is it a dark portrait of alcoholism and a man coming apart, or is it kind of, or is it a haunted house movie? And then even within that question, is it a fun ghost train kind of haunted house movie, or is it actually this really horrifically unsettling, black-hearted haunted house movie, which is actually all about the genocide of Native Americans and so on and so forth, and the terrible human kind of wreckage that we wreak generation after generation. Again, you look at it in many different ways, but the person I'm thinking of, their dad had just grabbed hold of them because it was just like a fun, scary movie.
Yeah, the thing that really shook me, and it wasn't the Jack Nicholson killing people with an axe or anything. It was everything up to that point. It was the, why the hell is there a guy dressed as a bear in this hotel?
Absolutely. Well, the bear scene is a particularly famous one.
Oh my God, absolutely, like uncanny, weird images. I mean, what is it that makes this film so scary, do you think?
Well, I think that idea, again, I'm not entirely sure if it's true, because certainly I wasn't there at the time. But there is a story that Kubrick had told a friend or acquaintance back in the 60s. He wanted to make the scariest film ever made, and he wanted to do it specifically in an episodic way, by dealing with every sort of single nightmarish, terrible little secret that a person has sort of buried in their psyche. And that he had, if you believe that was Kubrick's ambition, he'd been working up to The Shining as a series of kind of terrifying set pieces, and that he'd basically itemize, almost like a sort of, a surgeon laying out their tools. He had thought of which buttons he was going to press with audiences, one after the other, and which I think is how you end up with things like the Twins, because he's got this uncanny ability to hone in on ideas that we find unsettling to begin with, so time, and the whole idea about old photographs, all of this stuff is, empty space is obviously something which sets us on the back foot from the start psychologically, and then the idea of history kind of, and something having happened in the past which there is literally no escape from, and it literally seeping up from the floorboards and coming in from the walls, all of this stuff. I think again it's that idea about childhood, and it's a film about a child, a film about a kid on many levels. It's all that stuff that we're unnerved by as children, even if we can't articulate it. We're scared of, I was scared of clocks when I was a kid, because they are strange instruments, and then the passing of time is very, and obviously The Shining is all about time,
absolutely,
and men coming through the door with the axe, but it's all about what's been beneath that and behind that. It's this terror of passing time and things which have happened in the past that are going to reoccur and that we can't get away from.
I was scared by the wallpaper and the carpets in that film. Everything.
Well, the design. That's the thing. Because you can step back from The Shining quite straightforwardly and just look at it as this masterpiece, absolute masterpiece of production design. The interiors of the hotel, which are not just, it's not just that you can go and buy socks now with the pattern of the carpet on, because it's actually just this kind of great piece of interior design. It's also because, again, Kubrick being Kubrick, all of that stuff was. It was so fine-tuned to not just be aesthetically striking, but also to terrify us. There's something about the carpet. It's that idea about just very primal buttons that he pushes. So you have the maze, obviously it's the motif, and then you have the maze kind of reflected in the wallpaper and in the carpet. And mazes, and again, it's the same idea. It's that idea of literal inescapability of things, trapped with literally no way out. Again, it's stuff which seems, and this is one of the things I love so much about The Shining and about Kubrick in general. It's stuff which, when you talk about it, you sort of pick it out from the film and discuss it. It sounds kind of obvious. You think, well, yes, a maze. What could be a more obvious symbol of not being able to escape than a maze? But somehow Kubrick operates on a level where you don't think that while you're watching it. It just it's like it speaks to your subconscious.
It's craziness. And also, he does just do what he wants to do, like you say. And, if you look at other haunted house movies, they're dark, they're shadowy, they're creaky. This has none of that. It's brightly lit for the most part. Oh, yeah,
absolutely. So everything, you keep waiting. It's funny in The Shining, certainly the first time you see it, because you keep waiting for the horror movie moment where all the lights go out. It's the definitive horror movie motif. The lights go out, we're plunged into darkness, which again, and that is obviously the most primal fear when we're kids, is the lights going out. And as you say, Kubrick never does that. Lights down the whole time. You see characters who, yes, they are ghosts, but they're not who we're frightened of.
No.
It's not. He's making this very, very obvious horror movie on one level, and also making this, and it's one of the things which is fascinating about Shining. It's an anti-horror movie, not anti in terms of being hostile to horror. I don't see that at all, but in terms of just going in completely the opposite direction. So he's doing two things at once.
Yeah, he's kind of going screw it to all the rules and formulas, isn't he? That's
and I think it's interesting when you think about where he was coming from. The influences that he had. One of the things I discovered about The Shining, where I suddenly thought, oh, aha, of course, channeling Alan Partridge there. It was the fact that before they made The Shining, before they sort of went onto this famous shoot where Kubrick was, he really, there were individual shots where you had literally hundreds of takes. You had literally, I think there's one shot in there which is literally, and it involves Danny Leigh, the boy. So, he was a young boy at the time, and I think it's like 143 or 146 shots. Anyway, before they embarked on this completely insane process, he sat everyone down to screen them the movie that he wanted to, the tone of which he wanted to capture and to replicate in The Shining. And it actually wasn't The Innocents. It wasn't a haunted house movie in that sense. Well, not in the horror movie sense. It was Eraserhead.
Of course.
And then you watch The Shining again after finding out about the Eraserhead connection, and you think, oh, of course.
Yeah, of course. And you can see those Lynch connections in general. I think if it goes back the other way then as well, I think there's something about the kind of Red Room stuff in Twin Peaks that I just think ultimately of The Shining.
One of the things, and this is just for me, but I know you're a huge Lynch fan as well. And I think there will be other people out there for who Lynch and Kubrick. It's kind of interesting the way they talk. And they did meet, and Kubrick is told Lynch that exactly that he screened Eraserhead before The Shining, and Lynch was apparently hugely flattered and honoured as you would be. Yeah. So they explicitly did make that connection. But it's interesting, those two filmmakers, the way they sort of talk to each other through their films is really fascinating. And Eraserhead and The Shining is the most obvious place that happens.
Yeah, God, Eraserhead is terrifying in its own weird, unique
way. And
it's
also another haunted house, and again because it's about a character locked. Well, there's there's hundreds of similarities, hundreds of echoes, but at the most basic level, it's about a character behind locked doors, in Henry's apartment, and also specifically it's about families. I mean, in both cases, you've
wife and a child,
exactly that, and that's the thing about The Shining. I mean, you can look at it again. The hundreds and hundreds of interpretations that you can make of that film. You can look at this as as I was mentioning earlier. The guy who pulls his 10-year-old kid onto the sofa to watch this fun haunted house movie.
Yeah.
They can do that. I wouldn't do it with my 10-year-old son, but you can do that. Or you can look at this as the same. You can look at this as a film, and as lots of people have, which is about the genocide of Native Americans, and is about patriarchy, and is about the male patriarch, and the evil that is within patriarchy itself. Hauling around their wives and their kids, and doing terrible, brutal things. In Eraserhead and The Shining. Apart from the tone and that incredible capacity to just unsettle and unnerve us for like years afterwards. They're films about fathers who feel murderous rage towards their children. It's a really specific idea.
What a lovely double bill.
Exactly. So I like to do that on Father's Day.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about the performances then, because especially Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. I think I know a lot of people that hate those two performances, and then equally the opposite. People absolutely like. I mean, what's your opinion on those performances?
Well, they're very they are very deliberate. Certainly Jack Nicholson. I mean, it's a very purposefully, willfully huge performance. And it's about, and I think on some level there was obviously, it's a cartoon, and I think that was between Kubrick and Nicholson. I think that was very deliberate, and I think there was that sense that actually, just physically, in order to compete with the scale and match the scale of the rest of the movie, you had to have this kind of insanely cartoonish, insanely giant performance, at the heart of it. I think, absolutely. From the point of view of, I don't know, when people think about the craft of acting, I'm sure they're horrified, and not in a good way by what Nicholson's doing, because it does have more in common with Tex Avery a lot of the time. But I think it's perfect for what it is. I mean, Shelley Duvall is a much more interesting and slightly troubling case, because her performance is phenomenal, but as soon as you start to read a little bit about The Shining and find out about what was really going on, Kubrick basically kind of tyrannized her and made her life a misery, and actually that whole kind of slightly macho thing about take after take after take. It's interesting because part of you wonders whether what Kubrick was doing there was, because the whole film is about endless repetition and feeling and being trapped somewhere. So Kubrick is sitting there almost, it's like this method thing, also making his actors and the crew as well feel like they're trapped with this kind of, slightly deranged figure who is making them do the same thing over and over again. You don't know on what level Kubrick was operating then. But I think if you're Shelley Duvall and you've just got this very, 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 famous, very highly regarded director just shouting at you and telling you you're doing it wrong,
basically bullying you.
Basically. I mean, there is an argument to say that maybe that's a way of drawing out the performance that she gives, because essentially she's being bullied from all angles by this kind of male tyrant. But it's an unpleasant thing to think about that was going on a human level. The performance she ends up delivering is astonishing. Because it does feel very. Again, it's interesting because I think what it brings to the film is just a note of the real, because so much of the rest of the film, up to and including Nicholson's performance, is hyper real. It's surreal and it's hyper real. It's like, and it's overblown and over the top. But there are moments when Shelley Duvall is there, and it's one person being terrorised by another person in this insane confined space, and she brings us back. I think her performance is what makes us. She keeps bringing it back to the human, because you actually, and when we are connected to her.
Yeah, she's so important, isn't she? Because you've got Danny, who's sort of roaming around having all these weird visions, and you've got Jack Nicholson sort of losing his mind, and then she's the one who's just kind of going, "What the fuck is happening?" Entire time.
Exactly so, and she just wants to. She probably had she turned up at the Overlook expecting some sort of nice family. It would be like a family Christmas for 6 months. And you can see that. You can see this sort of sadness behind her eyes the whole time. And
again, it's my favourite sequence. I mean, we do usually go into spoiler territory on these kind of discussions. But I think it is my favourite sequence. Just as she's roaming around with that knife, she peers into these different rooms, sees different things happening. This guy in the bear, the elevator of blood, and you're just like, what is going on? And you're right there with her, and just sheer horror and confusion.
And also because it's interesting with the family dynamic as well, because she is the one who is kind of she is truly alone. Because one of the really troubling things about The Shining is it's that idea that that Jack and Danny, will ultimately, although Jack is terrorising Danny, there's that idea that this is what generations of like fathers do, and that Danny actually will, the awful moment of truth really with The Shining is that idea that Danny escapes at the end of the film, but there is no escape because actually, what's waiting is Jack. But obviously for Shelley Duvall, it was the whole point is that she is, she's at the mercy in that case. Danny is not terrorising her, but she is surrounded by this weird genetic male line, and she's just a bystander. Trying not to die in the process.
Totally, yeah. God, it's bleak, isn't it?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, really famously, this movie had such a grueling long shoot. I mean, Kubrick had the freedom, didn't he, to take as long as he wanted, and I think it took up to about 12 months of just filming this.
Yeah, that's before they actually went and edited it.
Yeah. So there must have been that real sense of kind of mad isolationism and, like you say, that kind of tyrannical patriarchy and all of that going on behind the scenes as well, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, again, you keep coming back to that idea of Kubrick as this, he was, by all accounts, if you talk to Kubrick, he was could be this very gentle, softly spoken character, very insular and kind of mischievous with a sort of, a very Moorish sense of humour.
Yeah.
I think if you're making a film with him, you don't necessarily see that. And I think, absolutely, in The Shining more than most. I mean, it was the whole legend of the film and the mystique is all built around multiple takes and nothing ever being right. And again, it's why I wonder whether on some level he was playing, even more brutally than it might appear with the actors. It wasn't even whether what they were doing was right or wrong. He just, he was going to, from the moment he shouted action at take one, he knew that there were going to be 70 takes.
He wanted that hysteria
because he was actually thinking about 5 scenes later on, driving the actors mentally to a point. I don't know, none of us know. But it wouldn't be entirely out of character, and it wouldn't be entirely out of character with with the film, that you would, and the result when we see the performances that are happening on screen, that these are people who, on some level, they're being pushed hard.
I mean, let's talk about when it was released. Then I'm always surprised to hear that it didn't do as well as it did initially. And it was even nominated for Razzies for Worst Actress, Worst Director. People were not embracing it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because what people were sold was a horror movie. Yeah. I think what people were sold. I mean, specifically, there's another, as well as there being a kind of a sort of companionship between Eraserhead and The Shining. I always feel in some ways that its polar opposite is The Exorcist, and Kubrick is supposed to have been offered the opportunity to direct The Exorcist and said no. And The Exorcist for me is much more of a, for better or worse, it's a much more pure, straightforward horror movie. Obviously it's dealing with again troubling and unsettling themes, but it's much more a film about good and evil, which the very nature of the story is about demonic figures, rather than the demon inside us. And so I think when The Shining came out, I think the way it was marketed, I think certainly people expected Kubrick's Exorcist. They expected something which was going to deliver that kind of story and those kind of scares, and it doesn't really do that, because there is this sense, and I think my sense is also that a lot of horror fans have quite a complex relationship with The Shining, because they're never sure whether Kubrick meant it or not, and I think sometimes there's a sense that Kubrick was just dabbling with horror, or that Kubrick saw himself as being above horror in some way. I mean, I don't think those things are true at all, but I certainly think at the time, I mean, if you wanted, because it was the era where it was post-Exorcist and things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre had happened as well.
A year after Alien even.
Exactly so, and that's a lot, so a lot of that is, it's great, brilliant, wonderful jump scare stuff. It's the real, it's the basic palette of the modern horror movie, which is wonderful. But that's not what The Shining was, and I think certainly. So you can imagine back in 1980, I imagine a lot of people turning up on Friday night expecting that and kind of not getting it, getting this very painfully slow, and then quite silly in places. If you want, that's the thing. I think The Shining either speaks to you or it doesn't, and if it doesn't speak to you, it kind of just looks ridiculous, and so it's just very painfully slow, child riding around in hallways, and then Jack Nicholson kind of gurning. I think if you if you were up for, again, if you turn up on Friday night in 1980 expecting The Exorcist, but like The Exorcist meets A Clockwork Orange or something, it's not that movie.
No, absolutely.
So the word of mouth would have been awful.
I suppose it was right in the middle of this kind of slasher boom as well, and you've got on posters, Jack Nicholson with an axe and stuff.
Exactly.
And again, it's like, well, you've got to wait 2 hours to get to that.
And I think the thing is, absolutely. I mean, that poster image, because what they had worked out clearly was that's, this is one of the scenes which is just going to completely lodge completely immovably in people's heads. So, they'd figured the marketing people had figured that much out. But then building the advertising campaign around it, you're basically saying, spend your, I mean, whatever it would have been in 1980, your £1.50, and you'll get 2 hours 20 minutes of this, and of course, as you say, you don't get that at all.
No. What they should have put on the poster is just a picture of like a corridor or something, shouldn't they? Of just a big open space.
Exactly. And I think also, I mean, the thing about it is, without wanting to claim too much for it, I mean, I think The Shining takes people psychologically to quite an uncomfortable place. And I think the whole, obviously, part of the makeup of the horror movie is catharsis, and it is that idea. The horror movie is a wonderful, complicated beast itself, but on one level at least, the popularity of the horror movie is because it shows us the boogeyman, it shows us something terrifying, and then we escape. And then it's fun, and we've confronted it in the safety of the cinema, and then we can carry on with our lives afterwards. Having got away, or at least even if the character didn't get away, we kind of do psychologically. Because we're not, I'm not trapped with Michael Myers. It's fine. The Shining doesn't let anyone off the hook. I mean, it's because it's a film where even though there appears to be, again, I'm sort of spoiler wary, but even though it toys with the idea of there being an escape, ironically, on screen, you don't quite buy it. And because it doesn't say this openly, but because the whole film is about their family, and by extension, it's kind of about all our families. All of us have got, we were all fathered. No matter what our domestic situations are, there will have been a father, there will have been a mother, we will have been children. So it speaks to us on that level. So when there is no escape in the film, I think you leave the cinema on a Friday night, presumably in 1980. Not only thinking, okay, well, that wasn't The Exorcist, but also thinking, God, I now feel really unsettled and depressed, and very much like there is no catharsis.
So true. And it's interesting what you were saying about, it's hard to pinpoint it into as a genre film or whatever. And I think at the moment there's a kind of wave of this where people are throwing around terms like post-horror and stuff to kind of movies that think that appear as horrors, but there's something above it. And I know a lot of horror fans hate that kind of post-horror elevated genre idea, as if to say if something is too good, it's not a horror film or something.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, but particularly if it's... I mean, I struggle with the idea of post-horror at all, because I think post sort of implies that something else has stopped, which is a weird idea.
It makes no sense.
And certainly, so, as a description, I'm not sure how useful it is. And also, because if what people are actually saying is that it's not really about post at all, it's actually just saying, but this is a really good movie in a way that genre horror movies aren't. I mean, that's just kind of snotty and awful and actually incorrect. I mean, it's actually just, some of the movies at least that are talked about as being post-horror are not that fantastic. And obviously, as you will know, and people listening will know, there's any amount of fantastic genre stuff being made at any one point. So that whole post-horror thing just seemed like quite a silly...
Very weird, isn't it?
A bit of a red herring, really. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. I mean, and also it's built around films where I think you can actually just, the films concerned are kind of horror or they're not.
Yes.
So A Ghost Story was talked about as a post-horror movie, but The Ghost Story to me was, despite the title, is a love story.
Yeah, it's not a horror film.
It's not. I mean, it's really not a horror film. And one of the nice things about it, the sort of ticklish, sort of mischievous things, is the title. And the whole idea of the Casper kind of that, the figure in the sheet. But I don't think David Lowery, the director, would have made it would claim it was a horror movie or any kind of horror movie. It's just not that. On the other side of things, It Follows to me and Get Out are both horror movies. They're not. I mean, I don't see what's post about either of those.
No, just because they say something more maybe than James Wan's The Conjuring does or something. It's still not gonna.
But I mean that's it. I mean, any number of movies within a genre will say any amount of stuff. Some movies say things, other movies don't. They're still genre movies.
Absolutely, 100%. So since then, obviously, The Shining has become, I think it's, it generally tops lists. It's hailed as one of the all-time best horror movies. And what I love is that, this movie is so kind of, it's so opaque, and you see something different in it every time. You watch something different every time if you want to.
Absolutely.
And people do have these different theories about what it's really about. I mean, you mentioned, Native Americans. There's been a whole film, hasn't there, Room 237?
Room 237, absolutely so.
About the sort of, the hardcore fans of The Shining and what they make of it. I mean, do you think... How far do you believe all of these theories, and do you think Kubrick set out to make any of these movies that these fans think he made?
I have to say, although it's interesting, I'd always seen myself as a kind of Shining superfan and someone who was quite obsessed by it and, read the film quite closely, and was fascinated by its nooks and crannies, and, reading and looking at every possible detail. Because Kubrick, he does set up visually. His scenes are these incredible assemblies of detail. So you can get lost in them, and you can have a lot of fun wandering through those mazes. I don't know. When I watched Room 237, I thought, well, I'm entertained by this. I do not feel that these are my people, actually, on quite a profound level. Because I actually just thought, it just feels like, who knows? But it just feels like there is a point where I'm someone who obsessively close reads movies in general, and particularly with a movie like The Shining, I've spent hours, years of my life doing that.
It invites it, doesn't it?
But I still pulled back because I just actually thought, no, I'm not entirely sure that the logo on the cereal packet in the corner of this show. I mean, it's interesting stuff to dig into, and who knows? I mean, if any director was ever going to be operating on that level of obsessive detail on screen, it will have been Kubrick.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because everyone knows his reputation of studying every inch of every frame.
So it sort of hangs together, but there are some things where I just think, I don't know. I mean, I just think he was operating on a much more, the genius of the film, the genius of cinema, and this is why Kubrick was one of the definitive filmmakers, was he operated on a subconscious level. Yeah. And it wasn't about, it's not that sort of detective story thing of leaving clues on screen that people will then consciously. I think it's much more about setting up images and ideas that might seem quite random and actually don't necessarily. So it's not, well, this is clearly a reference to, the moon landing, which never happened, or whatever it was. It's much more. Which is a much more kind of interesting and kind of sexy fun way to spend your time. It's more about plucking ideas that are just going to resonate in quite a strange, unpredictable way in people's unconscious.
Absolutely.
So that's why. So I think there are obvious things The Shining is about. I mean, I don't know whether, again, I like to think that Kubrick sat there in the 60s and thought, I want to make the scariest movie ever made. Right. And then The Shining came together sort of almost a decade and a half later. And it was just that pure, and it was just that subconscious. I think he was probably aware. I think The Shining was probably, it was a film made with an awareness of themes about fatherhood and parenthood, and certainly I do think the idea of Native America and what was done to Native Americans, it's there in the film. I mean, this isn't something which is buried that, it's not. No pun intended. It's not buried that far underneath the surface. Yeah. I mean, that is there. And so, then you get that whole idea about white America and patriarchy and stuff. Yeah. But I think all that stuff was definitely in the mix. But beyond that, I'm not so sure. I mean, the theories are fun. But,
I like the idea, like you said, that everything is there to set out to scare you. And it's one of those movies, we talked about this already, but it's one of those movies where you're scared by it and you don't know why. With some movies you can break it down and go, well, this is lined up to this jump scare and this is, whatever. With that, it's just like, why is this terrifying? But it is. And
you can step back from it, but it's also, there comes a point where it's almost like explaining a joke, which is that you can do it, but you sort of sit there and think, I'm not sure, at best, I'm not sure there's much point to this. And at worst, it's actually sort of ruining the magic. I mean, I think the way The Shining makes sense to me, and I think one of the reasons I connected with it so much is because it was interesting a second ago when we were talking about It Follows, because that felt in some ways like a weird spiritual sequel or a follow-up to The Shining, because they're both films which are about, at least on some level, about the terror of aging and about the terror of time beyond that, and it's Shining. So one of the scenes when I was, as I say, I thought I was a young boy. I was actually, kind of old enough to vote by that point. But one of the scenes is obviously it's the woman in the bath, and it's that transformation, and obviously, I suppose there's a sort of sexual undercurrent there as well, and playing with sort of your male sexuality and how you look at women, but also it's the idea of what is young, vital, in the prime of life, inevitably then becomes. Yes. We all become this sort of hag-like figure. Yes. I'm a lot nearer to it now than I was when I first saw The Shining. And it's that, and it's this very, at once very primal and also weirdly mundane. Which is that terror of getting old. But then, so it's a terror of getting old, but also like the whole idea about Jack Nicholson's character getting caught in the Overlook forever. It's that whole idea of, well, you're either getting old and decaying and dying, or you're being stuck forever, frozen in a photograph, unchanging and unmoving. It's like, well, so it's either A or B, and neither of those seem hugely appealing.
Absolutely, yeah. What's your favourite scene then, finally, in The Shining, if you had to pick one?
Oh, that's tricky. I mean, it's... that's a really tricky question. I think... I would be lying if I said that my connection with The Shining wasn't to those, just I don't know, a tiny percentage of my connection with it is because Danny is called Danny. Yeah. So I think so there's always so Danny boy in the maze, Jack shouting after him is something which speaks to me literally a lot on quite a primal level. Yes. The twins.
Yes. Hello, Danny. I mean,
exactly so. Yeah. It does. I'm quite a simple-minded person. It does operate with me on that level.
Thank you so much, Danny. And very quickly, I ask everyone this final question: what's your favourite horror movie and why? You're not allowed to say The Shining either.
I can't say The Shining. Well, that's interesting. Do I have to choose one? Because again, it's weird. There are films that I see as like horror movies. So something like Eraserhead, I see as a horror movie.
Absolutely.
Like Threads, which was a
God.
which is the kind of blow by blow account of the Third World War.
Yeah.
Seen through the point of view of Sheffield. Yes. I mean, that to me is a horror movie, and that sort of spoke to me very clearly when I was younger. I like a lot of the old Universal horror movies. So I like things like the Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
The Black Cat is a great favourite of mine. Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, good choice. Excellent.
Yeah,
good choice.
Is that good? All right.
Yeah. Cool. Amazing. Danny, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Mike.
A huge thank you there to the fantastic Danny Leigh. What a man. I could have sat and chatted to him for about 5 more hours about The Shining, but unfortunately there simply wasn't time. However, I just feel like I'm not done with The Shining. There's so much more to discuss. We talked around the movie, we talked about the sort of inception of the movie, the critical reaction, the legacy. But what about that movie itself? What about some of those key scenes? What does it all mean? Let's get into the nitty-gritty then. So, to join me to discuss even more of The Shining, the brilliant Louise Blain. Louise, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
No, it's exciting to be here.
Very, very exciting. First of all, just for people who don't know anything about you, please tell me just a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, I am a senior channel editor at Games Radar Plus, which means I get to write about video games, but also TV and film.
Very cool.
All the cool things I get to write about.
You must have a lot of people that are quite envious of your job, do you? Because you play video games, watch films, and write about this stuff all day long.
But it's that way, and I think you're the same when you talk about film, as everyone's like, oh, you get to watch films all day. It's like, well, no, but I have to write about them and talk about them too. So it's great.
Yes.
It's brilliant. Games are brilliant. And everyone says, you must have the best job. I do. Mm-hmm. I play a lot of games for a long time.
But it is also a job, isn't it? That's the thing. I do find
it's a very fortunate position.
Yeah, and I do find sometimes I lose sight of real life sometimes. And I find myself moaning about, oh, today at work I've got to watch 3 films. What a bloody nightmare, and it's like, okay, get some perspective.
I always talk to 16-year-old me.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Anytime you don't want to go to work, talk to 16-year-old you. See what she has to say about that. Don't be so ridiculous. This is amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is amazing.
So. It is very, very cool. Brilliant. So you do a bit of writing about horror and that kind of thing. What's your kind of overall, are you a fan of the horror genre?
I'm a massive fan of the horror genre. It's been something that I think since I was probably about 15 or 16 when I started watching Scream and all these late 90s horror.
Yeah.
I think it was like a gateway drug. I used to read a lot of ghost stories and a lot of horror stories when I was growing up. And I think that's the kind of gateway for all of us, isn't it? We look for the darkness and we find it in film.
Amazing. Interesting that you mentioned ghost stories, because obviously that's what we're talking about at the moment. So are you a fan of kind of that area of horror, that subgenre?
Massively. I think that's probably where I am most interested, in the fact that sometimes home invasion, etc., of course, has its very much place and is truly horrific.
Yes.
Utterly horrific. Yeah. But I think there's ghost stories that are a little safer. You can sit on a Sunday night with a cup of tea and you can read a ghost story, or you can watch a scary film, and you can take it to bed with you and you can think about things under your bed, and it's all that kind of safe horror. It's scary, but it's scary in a nice way. Definitely. Which is the kind of way that our grandparents and parents can go, how can you watch this for fun? But it's the kind of nice, reassuring fear.
It's the kind of fun end, isn't it? In a way, yeah, definitely. But equally, really genuinely scary. It's a different kind of scared, isn't it? I suppose. I was talking to someone the other day who I sort of asked, as I'll ask everyone, as I'll ask you later, kind of what's your sort of scariest movie, that you've watched, and she sort of said, well, there are 2 different types of being scared, and she sort of said on the one hand it would be, whatever she said, the haunting or something, but there's that other type of scared that I had when I watched a Serbian film or whatever, and it's like, it's true, there's that kind of spectrum there, isn't there?
Yeah.
But you're right, ghost stories have the kind of safe scares almost, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're like comfortable scares.
Yes, it's nice. Sit down to a ghost story.
Yes. Fine. However, having said that, this movie we're about to talk about did scar me for life a little bit when I was a child, and it is truly like unsettling in a different kind of way to anything else.
And you saw it when you were a child?
Yes.
That's something.
So first of all, when was the first time? Do you remember the first time you watched this?
I do know, and I had already read the book by this point because I was consuming King when I was about 15.
Interesting.
And when I first saw The Shining I went to Glasgow University summer school to make sure that I got good enough grades to get into university, and I took a film module, and that was where I saw The Shining. And they talked a lot about, we watched it in a big group, as you do. It's kind of that weird way to watch a film in a classroom situation. But then I was scared by it, but I'd already read The Shining, and at that time I felt like it was very different. And I've always been of the now incorrect view of the book's always better.
Yes, yeah.
And with that, I felt there was so many changes and there were so many things that I saw it as a completely different beast, and now I see it as a completely different beast because I'm a massive King fan.
It's almost easier just not to compare them, isn't it, in a way?
And I think when I saw it, they were so technical about it because it was that film module, and they're saying, here's these graphic matches, which of course it's full of technical because it's Kubrick, but now I've watched it multiple times since, I see it as far more of an experience than potentially a series of shots, which was what the teacher so wanted us to see, that it's like when people go and they do an English degree because they like reading, and then suddenly they don't like what they have to do with their favourite books.
It is a shame that, isn't it? I had the same thing. I studied film, and again, it's that thing, you kind of a bit lose sight of reality because you're moaning about having to watch films all day. But it does sometimes take the fun out of films.
Yeah.
I say, as I'm about to dissect a film in length on a podcast.
But of that particular one, taking it to such granular pieces.
Yes.
When, I rewatched it the night before last, and it's so much more than it's not just, it's like a book's not just words.
No.
So a film is not just a sequence of shots. No. And now I understand that, but then I didn't understand what the fuss is about, and now I do.
You
more
have to
so,
think
I think.
of it. You have to think about it in that frame of mind when you're in that situation, in that context. Yeah, absolutely. I had the polar opposite kind of experience with it. I watched it way too young. I think I was probably about 10 or 11. Oof. And I was... this was about the age when I started getting into horror films. I was like, Scream, I watched loads of 90s slashers, which I thought were really hardcore at the time. And then you kind of watch them back now and you go, oh, okay, But... My parents, who were very anti-horror, funnily enough, were the ones that recommended The Shining to me, and I'm not sure why. I think my parents...
I thought it would put you off.
Yes, I think, they didn't think it was as scary as it was, and I think in their head, they have that slight kind of post-horror point of view, where they were like, look, if you're going to watch this slasher trash, at least watch this. It's a really good psychological thriller with good acting, and it's Stanley Kubrick, and you'll like this, and at least it's better quality than that crap you're watching. And of course, that is the movie that absolutely scarred me for life, and I couldn't sleep afterwards. So I actually had my parents to thank for that, and I wanted to go back to slashers afterwards. But there is something about this film that is like you say, you can't just talk about it in a technical way, because there is something that hits you, or hits me at least, on a kind of unconscious, subconscious level almost. It's so weird, and you can't explain why it's so scary.
What's bizarre as well is I was tweeting about it as I was watching it, because as we do, and someone later said, every noise in The Shining is perfect, and it's absolutely right. From the moment the opening credits and you get those discordant notes, that helicopter shot is never going to be a family going somewhere nice. They're not going to Centre Parks. They're not doing anything fun. No. And you know it. And you know it in there's sort of gentle sort of fades going from as they get further and further from humanity, and they're leaving.
Yes.
And suddenly you can, this is going somewhere that I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know where this is going. And then when you see the overlook, and even though it's meant to feel normal and there's still people in there, it's not normal.
No, it's not. And this is it, actually. And this is something we've talked about so far when we've been talking about Ghost, is that what they capture so well is that word, the uncanny. It's that it kind of looks normal, but it's not. Something about it is just off. And The Shining is full of that from beginning to end, isn't it? It's like, okay, you've got beautiful scenery here. You've just got these lovely shots of this family making their way to this lovely scenic hotel. And yet something is very, very wrong the very beginning. And of course, that is due to the score, which is terrifying. But also just something about his cinematography that evokes something in me. And actually... I get this with all of Kubrick's films in a weird way, not even the horror ones, but there's something about, Full Metal Jacket or A Clockwork Orange or 2001. Every shot of his film, all of his films give me this kind of weird feeling of dread. Yeah. Eyes Wide Shut, even. Yes. All of them. Yeah. It's something about his filmmaking.
There's no happy shots.
There isn't. It's really weird. And, Stanley Kubrick gets accused a lot of his films. The people that criticise him say his films are too cold or not human enough. I mean, what do you agree with that?
I think in terms of The Shining, I think it's interesting because that's what Stephen King said about The Shining, that it was a fancy car, but there was nothing inside. There was no engine, I think was what he said. And he also said that it was a film that was going to hurt people. Because of the lack of humanity in it. Because if you read the book, from the opening minutes, it starts very similarly to the movie itself, where Jack goes to the hotel and it's either, he's interviewed, the guy doesn't want to give him the job in the book, but he's getting it in the film. But you feel much more attached to him in the first few pages by the way he reacts to this guy. He's a bit of a slime ball and all these things. That's not really there. There's a distance.
He's totally cold.
There's a distance. There's no, there's not anything nice about that interview at all. Even though there's nothing nice about it in the book, you already attach yourself to him and you can understand that, you're getting a job and you don't like the person that's doing it, but you got to please them. None of that is there in that office.
The basic idea is to cope with the very costly damage and depreciation which can occur. And this consists mainly of running the boiler, heating different parts of the hotel on a daily rotating basis, repairing damage as it occurs, and doing repairs so that the elements can't get a foothold. Well, that sounds fine to me.
It's almost kind of stilted, And if it wasn't done by such a good filmmaker, you'd say that scene was just awkward in a way, wouldn't you? And weird, and yet it's kind of works. And it's funny, isn't it? Because Stephen King, I was thinking about this, because obviously he is such a well-known horror writer, but he is actually a very warm author. Yes. His films, even the most even if you look at it, or and then obviously you've got things like Shawshank, Stand By Me. He's actually his characters are all full of heart. His stories are full of heart.
There's so much heart.
And that is there is no heart in The Shining.
No,
that is
there's
the one
none
thing that it lacks.
It's empty.
Definitely, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what fills you with so much dread from the start. Is that everything is icy cold. And it's just that situation as well, isn't it? I mean, do you think? There's part of me that thinks, would I love this job, getting to go to a hotel, having a hotel to yourself on a mountain for peace and quiet to do nothing but write for 6 months? Does that sound like heaven or hell to you? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, actually, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But I guess if you were on your own, and it taps into that thing of, it'll be perfect, we'll go with the family. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later in the fact of, it now scares me a lot more the way Jack turns on Wendy.
Yes.
That didn't scare me when I was 16, because why would it? But it's the idea of the one grown-up that you're with being the one that turns on you when you have nothing else and you only have that other human. You have a child, that's fine, but it's not the same. There's not a wavelength, there's not a connection. And suddenly the scene where Wendy's talking on the radio to the guy, she's just desperately trying to keep him holding on to talk about the weather, to talk about something, because that disconnect from other people would drive you a bit crazy. I mean, you and I, we've both worked from home for various days. You know what it's like when you go outside for the first time?
Yeah.
Maybe just imagine working from home, but to the nth degree. Yes. And maybe it's not perfect. And that's before you bring it up, a room 237 into the mix.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. And it's the most vast space. I mean, Stanley Kubrick makes a huge, puts into every shot just how big this space is. It's not like it is claustrophobic, and yet it kind of is in a weird way, isn't it? I read somebody compare it to something like Alien. Even though they're not stuck in outer space, they might as well be. They are so far from anything and anyone.
What about Tony? He's looking forward to the hotel, I bet.
Mr. Torch.
Now, come on, Tony. Don't be silly.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torch.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
So I was watching the other night, and I'd never thought about it before, but the entire tone of the entire movie is overacting.
It is, yeah.
And
it is.
It's the fact that, and I think Kubrick potentially caused all this overacting because he allegedly made them do all these takes over and over and over again, which must have brought out something quite unique in Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, and probably less so Little Boy. But I think there's a distinct sense of, this is a script. We are saying the script and we're overacting it.
Yes.
But again, into that uncanny section where you're like, this is so weird that I can't stop watching your eyebrows and your teeth, and you're being very Jack Nicholson about this, but at the same time something possessed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so, obviously everything Kubrick does, as we all know, is so deliberate. So it's not as if you can ever chalk anything up to, oh, that's just how they were on that take, because you know it's exactly as he wanted it. And it's the kind of awkward back and forth where it will sort of reverse cut between two characters having a conversation, and there'll always be a little pause at the end, and it'll linger too long, and nothing kind of flows. And again, it's that kind of uncanny thing, isn't it? You notice that more and more the more you watch it. And that's the thing, I suppose it's one of those movies as well where I notice something new every time I watch it as well, which is, I think, what makes it so brilliant.
Tony, why don't you want to go to the hotel? I don't know. You do too know. Now come on, tell me. Don't want to.
Actually, we should talk about that moment. Again, before they even go to the hotel, Danny has his first kind of vision, doesn't he, where he's in the bathroom. And you get that sort of montage of images. And again, it's like, it's not done in a way that is classically scary, is it? It's kind of slow and foreboding.
I think that's when he sees the start of the blood, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's kind of the first thing. And he sees the little girls as well.
Yeah.
He sees so much in that.
It's like he gets a little montage of everything coming
here's
up.
everything that's coming.
That
seeds it to you as well, which is interesting. Because you would expect those to be... Another horror director might hold on to all those. They would be the money shots later on. But no, here's what you're getting.
You get them, but with no explanation. And again, you're like, holy fuck, what the hell's going on?
This? Yeah. And why is a child seeing this? This is worse because a child's seeing it.
Yes. Yeah, it's bizarre. And again, it messes with time so much. And I suppose the great thing about this power he has, the Shining, is that sometimes he sees things from the past, sometimes it's the future. You don't know which is which ever as well. So it's like, is something going to happen to him? Is it not? It's bizarre.
It's never explained really especially in the film. The Shining's never really... No. It's just you have the shine or you don't. Yeah. And it's
that one brief chat, isn't there, with Mr. Halloran, is it? Yeah. Scatman Crothers. Yeah. And that's kind of it. That's how set up.
You know, Doc, when something happens, it can leave a trace of itself behind. Say, like, if someone burns toast. Well... maybe things that happen leave other kind of traces behind. Not things that anyone can notice, but things that people who shine can see. Just like they can see things that haven't happened yet. Well, sometimes they can see things that happened a long time ago. I think a lot of things happen right here in this particular hotel over the years. And not all of them was good.
As far as I can remember, the film was very much... the book, was very much about a haunted... a kind of evil hotel, wasn't it?
The hotel wanted the souls. Yes. Sort of wanted fed, so to speak. It's a simpler ghost story there.
Absolutely. And this film is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
He kind of... it makes it a bit more ambiguous, I suppose, doesn't he?
It's almost a haunted hotel story with a more vindictive hotel. That's not to say that the one in the book is not scary, because I read the book and I was scared of the moving hedge animals. I'm not going to lie. Like, there's many perfect king scares in there, but they're more understandable. But there's also the problems of addiction, alcoholism, and Jack. He's addicted to painkillers, crunching up painkillers in the book as well. But somehow all those things are unnecessary.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, we have blood running from elevators.
Yes.
We have twin girls chopped up in a hallway, and we have a ghost in a bathtub. If you boil it down to that, we still have a haunted house story.
Yes.
At its heart, but it's almost less important.
Yeah.
Than
it's true.
The degradation of the sanity of Jack.
Yeah. There's less. It feels like the ghost scenes are a minority, and the rest of it is just weird, big, ominous, open spaces of a man's psyche or something, isn't it? Yeah, it's very, very odd. And, there's that scene in the beginning when they're first driving up to the hotel, because, again, kind of in my head, I always think, the beginning of the film, he's kind of nice and normal, and then he turns. But actually, when rewatching it, you see more and more, okay, he shows signs of being quite mad from the very beginning, doesn't he? That moment when they're in the car is quite weird.
And he's talking about the cannibals.
Yes,
and
yes.
And then it's the fact that he says, because he watched it on the television.
Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. You saw it on the television.
And it's the tone, and you're like, that could be a perfectly normal tone, but at the same time, there's a madness there. It's already there before you got to the hotel.
Yes, and his face helps because he's got those eyebrows that are permanently kind of angled, and the music kind of goes, at that moment as well. So it's everything, isn't it? But I just remember, being a child watching this on a completely surface, visceral level and not thinking about themes or anything. Yeah. And I remember feeling at that moment, oh my God, this is scary. This is too scary. And it's like, you can't explain why at that point. There's nothing, in your face happening. In fact, it takes a long time really for anything really quote unquote scary to happen in a way.
It really does. And there's no jumps.
No.
That's not a thing.
No.
But it's scary for it. Mm-hmm. It's like nothing happens to them when they go into the maze.
Nope.
But it's horrible.
Yes.
It's not a mother and a child out having a nice time in a maze. It's awful. It's claustrophobic. The hedge walls are 50 feet high. Mm-hmm. He's gazing down at that map. Mm-hmm. They are in, they look like sort of playthings for him. And there's all of these hideous themes, but on the surface it's fine. We're just going skipping, which must be really disturbing to watch as a child because you can understand subtext and you're going, why is this scary? Why am I afraid?
Yes, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? And that's something that Danny Leigh mentioned to me. There's something that Kubrick does that it's not like where you can look at the mechanics of a scare with some things like Hitchcock or whatever.
Yeah.
You can't really get that with this. No. That he somehow hits everyone in their subconscious. That is what's so genius about it. You can't really dissect why this film is scary for a lot of the time.
How's it going?
Fine.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like going back to those kind of human moments with Jack and Wendy, the moment where she first kind of interrupts him writing is a truly, and again, it's one of those moments, like you said, when you're an adult, you feel it more, don't you?
It got worse.
Yes.
I had never experienced it quite as badly as I did.
Get a lot written today?
Yes.
Hey, the weather forecast said it's going to snow tonight.
What do you want me to do about it?
Oh, come on, hon. Don't be so grouchy.
I'm not being grouchy. I just want to finish my work.
Okay, I understand.
I've been the person that's sitting writing.
Yes. I was thinking this.
And it's like, I have been that person sitting writing, and someone's come in. I worked at home at Christmas for one day, and my mum came in and kept bringing me tea, and she's like, "Oh, do you want to go out for a walk?" And it's like, no, I can't. I'm working.
Yeah, but we all feel that niggling.
Yeah, we all have, but we're never him. And it's the fact that he takes it from, I'm busy. And if you ever, he takes it layer by layer. Mm-hmm. There's this horrible kind of, if you hear me doing this, and it just gets worse and worse.
Yes.
And you constantly get the shot back to her eyes where she's like, yes, Jack, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it just routinely gets worse.
Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
And it's the most painful scene, and I think that's something that Kubrick does as well, is he gives things time.
Yes, everything lingers.
So much time.
Yeah.
It was a point later on where he's in the bathrooms with Grady, and he's trying to tell him that he's the Grady that chopped up his kids.
Yes.
And he just stands and looks. And there's a shot from really far back, and you're like, this is really awkward.
Yes.
Because there's still this silence. It's like, keep giving this time.
Yes.
And there's time.
Yes.
And it's still going. And oh God, it's still going. And it's this time management, which another editor would cut.
Yes.
It would be snappier.
Absolutely.
It would be faster.
And
but
you could hear Kubrick going, hold it for longer, hold it for longer, hold it for longer. And it's like Mr. Grady going, you are the caretaker. You've always been, and everything about it is like
suddenly you're just like, oh, this is painful. Why am I so afraid of time?
Yes.
I've never been so afraid of 2 hours in my life.
And again, it's like, why is that bathroom so red, and why is that so scary?
Yes.
You know, again,
why does it look like this?
Yeah. I mean, we should definitely talk about the production design. Again, a big aspect of ghost stories, I think, more than a lot of other horror. It is a huge aspect because it's often just set in a house, and often the house is so important. It's often a character in itself. But what you often get are big gothic mansions or sort of dark, shadowy corridors, cobwebs, you know, think of like Women in Black or The Haunting or The Innocents, you know, candlelight, whatever. This is, again, couldn't be more different to the general conventions of a ghost movie, could it?
No, it's especially evident in the scenes following Danny on his bike. That's the ever-changing constant circles, and that's where the sort of conspiracy theories come in, because people go, the Overlook Hotel can't be built like that. And then, but if you take it a step back before that, it's just going round those, touring round the Overlook, seeing the kitchens, the expansive kitchens, seeing these long neon lit corridors, seeing hotel corridors. We've all been in hotels. We all know what they look like. It's a series of identical rooms. Why is it scary? Oh, who knows? It's become that again, and it's this unnerving constant tour that we go on with Danny, and it's constantly going around those corners, and you think, what's going to be the next time? What are we going to see the next time?
What's going to pop up? And the brilliant thing is that you get that sequence about 3 times before finally, bam, you do get something around the corridor. And again, this was the moment where, when I was a child, I had to stop it. I was like, okay, this is too much for me now. This is too much.
Hello, Danny. Come and play with us.
And it wasn't even seeing them dead. It was just seeing them standing there. That is
the unnerving nature of that.
Come and play with us, Danny. Forever.
No, it's horrible, and it's something to do with that carpet and the wallpaper and everything. It's the combination
pattern.
of everything.
There's big discussions about that carpet pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that hits you, and again, I discussed this briefly with Danny, but apparently Kubrick was quite influenced by David Lynch. He loved Eraserhead, David Lynch's first film, and David Lynch loved Kubrick, and there is an element of Lynch there as well, where it's like, it doesn't really make any sense what's going on, and yet it's kind of nightmarish, and that. And again, it's just something that hits you on a kind of guttural level somehow. It's weird. It's hard to even discuss.
It is hard to discuss. I guess it's probably the most theatrical. It's the part where you know that every set, everything is there for a reason.
Yes,
and it's
definitely.
Like they talked about the shot when he was throwing the ball. At the wall. Apparently that was ad-libbed, but then they ended up spending 3 days trying to get the perfect shot of the ball doing its thing.
Of course.
And of course you have to take an ad-lib moment and then Kubrickize it. So that it becomes something that takes days.
Yes, and it's almost like he doesn't want anything to look natural or improvised, does he? That's the other thing. Again, he's kind of deliberately... I wonder what made him read this Stephen King book and go, no, this is how it needs to be done, you know. But he was right, but, you know, it's just crazy. You know, what a genius he must have been. Although clearly not a nice person. Not somebody I would have ever wanted to meet, to be honest, or work with.
No, you hear the stories of the way he treated everyone on that film, and you go, this product is great, but no, not so much.
It's so classic, isn't it? I mean, it's what you hear about so many great artists, musicians, anything. They're horrible people or really messed up in some way, you know.
Jack, there's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to strangle Danny.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
No.
Yeah, I mean, Shelley Duvall, and I think actually the more I watch The Shining, the more I love Shelley Duvall's performance.
As do I.
Yeah.
I think I used to be quite irritated by her.
Me too. I used to think she was a bad actress compared to the others.
That's what I thought too.
Now
and I also
think the opposite.
And I thought she was weak as well.
Yes.
And now I don't think she's weak. I don't think Wendy is a weak character, even though she hits him with a bat and sends him down the stairs.
Yes.
She drags him through the hotel.
Yes.
She locks him in the larder.
Yeah.
she does all the right things.
Yeah, she does what she needs to do.
She stabs him when he puts his arm through.
Yeah.
She puts her child out the window to protect him.
Yeah.
She tries to go, but she can't. And she stays and sacrifices herself to distract. So she's not weak. And I finally worked this out, because I think a lot of people, she's very interesting looking in the way that they dress her as well. And she's very striking looking, especially in The Shining, and has been shot that way particularly.
Yes.
And I used to be furious when she was sort of running around near the end.
Yes, just hysterical. Yeah.
And then suddenly you go, actually, you've now lost everything. Your husband is now, I'd love it if she was a postmodern feminist hero sassing about her boots and all the rest of it, but that's not who this character is.
No.
But there is a strength to Wendy that I now see.
But the really sad thing is, like we say, the way that Stanley Kubrick treated her is that I think also there's another layer to that performance where it's like there's genuine kind of madness there as well.
Yeah, because he told people not to look after her, not to pity her, or this will get you nowhere. No one sympathise with her, and it sounds horrific.
Yeah.
It did not sound pleasant in any way.
No, I think you can watch on the DVD, there's a documentary that Stanley Kubrick's daughter actually filmed a lot of the behind the scenes. It's really interesting, and you see him shouting at her, being generally horrible to her, her getting upset, and I've also heard an interview with her where she sort of said, I think it took nearly 12 months to film, and for half of that she was just spending all day every day crying and screaming. It's just sheer exhaustion, and she said, I'd have to keep drinking water because my body, I physically couldn't cry any more tears, and he kept asking me to, and it's like, God, how that really would mess you up, I think.
The stress for 12 months.
Yeah, 12 months.
Going to, when you have a hard day, you come home at the end of the day and you go, that was a hard day. It wasn't a hard day. You didn't have to cry for 12 hours or sit under lights or be in baking heat when it's meant to look cold or all of these things.
Yeah.
It must have been. It's
pretty horrible, isn't it? And then at the end of all that, she kind of is berated as being the crap actress next to the brilliant Jack Nicholson, and it is sad that, and she was the one that got the Razzie nomination and all that, and you just think, oh God, the poor thing. And actually I watch it now and I just think she's really good.
She's good. She's really good. Good. I think before I used to be furious about her. I'm not at all anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you put yourself into this thing and you think, this is how movie people should behave, this is how characters should be behaving, and I'm watching this and they're not behaving in the way that I think they should, so I'm furious. But I now appreciate that performance entirely.
Yeah, because I think, again, it's all part of Kubrick's. Everything is not meant to look real. Everything is just there to make you feel something.
Yeah.
And her is that, classic famous poster shot of him, his face coming through the door, and her absolute, like, kind of almost like ghost-like face with her mouth open and gaunt and pale, and there's just, again, just like madness and fear in her eyes. How much of that is real? Who knows?
It looks really real.
You just again, it all adds to the fear of just seeing her with that much fear. It's just terrifying. And actually, my scariest moment in the film is the sequence where she runs around seeing all the crazy shit at the end, and the absolutely terrifying moment where she sees the two guys in that hotel room with no explanation. One of them is dressed as a bear.
Yep.
I think one of them is performing oral sex on the other one, probably, but we're not entirely sure. And they just look at the camera and there's that fast zoom in and just like, what again, this? What's happening? What's going on? Why are they there? Why are they looking at us? What's happening? Again, it's like there's no explanation to it, and that's what makes it all the more nightmarish, I suppose.
And I think the fact that at that point, who was meant to come and save them is now dead on the floor.
Yes.
The rescuer is now dead. And you're like, that okay, well, that went well.
Yeah. He spent like half the film just getting there. Yeah.
Getting on a plane, sitting in that, there's that weird bit when he's in that hotel room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my God.
Which is really strange.
Oh my God. Absolutely. Yeah. So weird.
It's really
what's
strange.
Going on? What's going on with the room that he's in? The posters.
Yeah, with the paintings on the wall, the pictures. Yeah, which I don't think I'd noticed the first time. I was like, that's not a big deal, and then I was watching it and I'm like, it's
a bit uncomfortable.
It's odd.
Yeah, it is odd. And then again, amazing Scatman Crothers' face as that camera sort of slowly zooms in on him, and his face just turns into pure fear. Really weird, uncanny, horrible, spooky stuff. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, what about, have you got any kind of favourite moments, any highlights? It's hard to pick one, isn't it? That's the thing.
I really love the end when he's walking backwards through his own footsteps.
Yes, amazing.
That to me, because I'd forgotten exactly how he did it, and I'm like, you'd walk back in your snowy footsteps, and that's exactly what he does. He does again a very human thing.
Yes.
And you aren't at that point. It's all to play for.
Yes.
There's still a risk. It's like when you're watching Titanic and you think the iceberg might miss.
Yes.
And you're watching and you're like, he's not going to catch him this time. I'm sure he gets out and it's fine. I know exactly how this finishes. I know where he ends up. But I need to be tense right now because he's still running through the snow from his father.
Yeah.
But that lumbering gait, it's that those steps are somehow worse than just normal walking.
Yeah. And it's that kind of, oh my God, he's so slow and meticulous about it, but you're just thinking, fucking hurry up.
And you're looking at it going, there's nowhere to hide because all of these bits just have lights in them, and I've seen it before that there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
So how's it? Oh.
I do love, I mean, obviously, you know, the big kind of central set piece of Room 237 is also quite terrifying. And again, what is going on in that scene? And again, the way that that scene is set up and filmed is just so weird and not of the norm.
No.
The kind of wide shot of the room, and you see the woman in the distance. She's so small in frame.
Yep.
But again, it's something about it, the way she kind of sits up and looks at us.
It's the time. Yeah. Again, it's the length of time she takes to stand up. To walk towards him, and you're going, no, don't do that. No. Because even though he's you know, not doing normal human things at that point, you're like, no, this is the point. You don't stay. You don't stay here. You turn around and you leave. That doesn't happen.
No. It's so weird. And again, do you take this at face value that this stuff is all happening, or because again, I've read some theories that it's just like this is all Jack's head. This is all madness. You know,
because I subscribe to King's theory, which I really like, and I like that. I like the haunted hotel. I like the fact that it's hungry, and the fact that each room can hold things. So I like the fact, and I trust in the fact that it's not real, and I could leave the Overlook and leave it all behind. You know, I think that's. I think it's a safe. It's a safe school of thought in the fact that I'd rather that wasn't happening in someone's head. So I want those scars on Danny's neck to have come from a ghost.
Yes.
Which had physical presence then, but then could disappear into the walls. So I'm very much of that school of thought, because otherwise I'll go insane. Yeah, no, fair enough. In the book, is it that Jack also has The Shining? Is it that him and the son? Because I've forgotten now. But this is the question now, because the theory, I was watching a video on it, and the theory is that when he's in the larder, that you don't know if Grady or the hotel opens the very physical door, or whether Jack has The Shining, and that's what that is.
Right. Yes.
So I think in the book it's very much the hotel that's playing them, because if you think about the hotel being very alive, it can open its own doors, it can do what it wants, it can show you what it wants.
I mean, it literally comes alive in the book, doesn't it? Like the hedge animals and stuff.
So I think it's a constantly moving thing in the book, rather than him having it too. But it could be in the film that he, you know, Danny has it, so he has too. So.
Yeah, because it's the only moment in the film really where you have to accept, okay, that hotel is
something happened
real,
there.
You know, something's going on, because he's locked in a room and then he's not. But everything else, you just think everything else is set up, I think, to be like, this is the story of a man going mad, basically, isn't it? Even the maze and the way he looks at the maze, it's kind of like, this is his head, this is his mind right now, you know.
And they are running around in there, and they're never going to get out.
Exactly. And obviously what he's writing on his typewriter from the start, from before he goes quote unquote mad, he's obviously been doing this, hasn't he?
That's horrible. That's also, who did that? Who did all that typing?
Oh my God, because you know he would have made somebody to that whole...
But the theory is that either he got someone to do it, or there's a whole set of people that say they didn't do it, so he must have done it himself to make sure it looked just right. Because obviously some of it looks like it's in stanzas or poetry,
it
and
changes.
It changes throughout, and it looks structurally, and there's chapters and everything.
Absolutely.
How can a stack of paper
the whole thing is
so
terrifying,
unnerving.
isn't it? That's the thing. That's the thing. It's like the making of it sounds as terrifying as the film itself,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that helps as well. That adds to it, doesn't it? It's like it's almost sort of mythological now. This whole
same as the making of The Exorcist. That's got the same mythology attached to it, and the same odd behaviour of a director to his leading actress. That kind of thing. That's all. It is a pattern there.
Actually, I was thinking, if you take another Stephen King film like Misery, for example, which in some ways has similar things. You know, you've got isolated people in the snow. One of them is going mad, who may seem friendly at the beginning. You've got one person who's journeying to save them and then doesn't.
Yes.
Spoiler alert. You know, in some ways it fills some of the same story beats, but that's directed by Rob Reiner, and you could see the difference there. You know, in the way these stories are told.
I think if Misery had been directed by Stanley Kubrick, I don't think we'd all be the same human beings afterwards.
No, because Misery is pretty tough to get through anyway.
Misery is intense.
It's really
Misery is really intense.
Really intense. But it's intense in a kind of proper narrative way, whereas this is intense in a whole other way that you don't quite understand. I mean, what is the elevator of blood as well? Like, again, never explained. What do you think that is? Is that just the hotel being evil? I mean, what is it?
I think I like the idea of the sort of the hotel taking blood. That is literally the blood. It's almost a sacrifice to the hotel, like that kind of thing. Because obviously you've kind of got the theme of the Indian burial ground, which is obviously that.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about next. Yeah,
it kind of takes. I like the idea that it just takes, and it says also the sort of life of it as well. If the hotel has blood, it's alive. These are suggestions of
it is.
It's not just its victims, but is that part of the hotel? And there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, because there is a brief mention at the beginning, isn't there, that the hotel was built on an Indian burial ground. Yes, of course. Like so many Stephen King stories, I feel like that's a classic, isn't it? A pet cemetery, basically. But yeah, you know, and there's lots of theories. There's obviously a whole film just about fan theories about
Room
The Shining.
237,
yeah, what a weird film that is. Again, it's kind of weird on a whole other level. It's weird that it's more a film about fandom, isn't it, I think, than about The Shining in a way. You know, there are obviously theories that, you know, the Overlook Hotel is America and this is the story of the Native Americans almost, or whatever. You've got other people who have the theory that this is the elevator of blood, and that kind of imagery evokes things like the Holocaust. And you've got other theories that are to do with the moon landing and the Apollo 11.
The moon landing's my favourite one because it's so multi-layered. So not only is Danny wearing the Apollo jumper.
Yes.
So Jack says something about, what does he say? He says, "Don't you understand that I took on a job that I need to commit to the best part of my abilities?"
Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers? Does it matter to you at all that the owners have placed their complete confidence and trust in me, and that I have signed a letter of agreement, a contract, in which I have accepted that responsibility? Do you have the slightest idea what a moral and ethical principle is, do you?
Yes.
Which people think is Stanley Kubrick's confession for directing the moon landings.
It's amazing.
And the fact that all work and no play, the start of that is A11. So it's Apollo 11.
Yeah.
And there are so many. That, of all of them, is one of my favourites because it has so many bits. And also there's something in the larder about that astronauts would eat in space.
Yes, I remember there was a lot of talk about the various food items in the larder.
Yes.
That's apparently massively important.
Something about that's to do with the Native American.
Yes.
There's a link, Calumet, peace pipe. There's all kinds of interesting.
Yeah. It's all the brands and things, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the fact that none of that's there by accident. But the moon landing one is my favourite because I love the idea that it's the case. I don't believe in moon landing.
No.
Conspiracy theories, but I enjoy them very much.
It's brilliant. It's amazing. And, you know, it's funny that if with any other filmmaker you dismiss these completely, with Kubrick, you in some ways you can believe, okay, well, there's probably a reason why he's wearing an Apollo 11 jumper.
Yeah.
You know, there's probably a reason why they talk about an Indian burial ground. Like all these things, you just think maybe this guy thinks about every inch of what he puts in the frame.
Yeah, and the Holocaust stuff, the obsession with 42.
That's it,
because that was when the Nazis put in their final solution.
Yes.
So 42 comes up a few times, and there's something to do with 237 adding up to 42. What is it?
Oh, God.
2 times 3 is 6 times 7 is... Yeah, so...
That's brilliant.
Even though the story goes that the reason it's room 237 as opposed to 217 in the book is because the Timberline Lodge, which was where they shot the exteriors, didn't have a room 237, and it did have a 217, and they didn't want people to not want to stay there. So I'm going to go with that.
I could believe that more, to be honest.
Although, if you were going to make The Shining, wouldn't you want people to go in 217? Because then that room would be full forever.
Yeah, it's true.
You'd have people queuing up for room 217.
I have always wanted to stay in a room 237 in a hotel.
See?
I never have.
No,
yeah.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
Room 101. I've stayed in a few room 101s.
yes,
I've put myself in room 101.
Yeah.
I've never stayed in a 237.
No, 237. It's probably one of those things, actually, where actually no hotel has a room 237,
like
and we just don't know about it.
Like a 13th floor.
Yes,
There's no such thing as room 237 anywhere.
Exactly.
There ain't nothing in room 237. But you ain't got no business going in there anyway. So stay out. You understand? Stay out.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I love about this film. It's just endless, bonkers theories about what could be going on, and who knows how much Stanley Kubrick thought about it or not. You just know that because of all the legends about how long this film took and how he sweated over every element of it, it's so much fun to think about, isn't it? That's the thing.
I think when you look through, I was taking a look at, there's so much trivia and so many conspiracy theories, and they all, a lot of them contradict each other.
Yes, yeah.
So many of them contradict each other. And suddenly you're like, it's gone beyond truth.
Yeah.
It's gone into legend and lore.
Yes.
And it becomes less about what was actually the case, but what people maybe thought that people did. It becomes this, the Shining mythology is as fascinating as its creation on its own.
What I like to believe most, actually, which is what Danny Leigh said to me about it, and I think I kind of want to believe this more than anything else, that I think he did make every decision about every element of this film, but it was purely to scare you.
Yeah.
I think whatever weird things he did and whatever weird patterns he chose or objects in the frame or editing choices, it wasn't with hidden messages. It was, how can I get you on a subconscious guttural level to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible, basically.
What will get you here,
Yeah, and I think that's probably what he was really going for, I would imagine, and and he's succeeded. It's like one of those things where I feel like you could pause it at any frame and it would be both beautiful and terrifying, and you could hang it on the wall as a terrifying portrait.
I had to do that the other day because I wanted to go make a cup of tea, and I chose the point I paused it at. I was really careful because it was just after room 237. I couldn't pause it during room 237 because then I would have had to return to room 237 being on my screen
naked old
in my living room.
Lady
so I had to get through that. But even then, picking a frame to pause it on to feel okay about when I came back in turns out it's really challenging.
It's impossible.
Most films I would just go pause, done.
Yeah.
But not with Shining. I was very conscious about where I paused.
Yeah. With a lot of horror films, it kind of has a kind of scary moment and then some downtime.
Yeah.
And this doesn't really have that, even though in some ways the whole film is downtime. Like nothing really happens, and yet there is no downtime. At the same time, you'll sit there like this, like kind of gripping your seat the whole way through.
I think when I did pause it, I looked at the time I had left and I was 59 minutes in. And I'm going, why am I so uncomfortable now?
Yeah.
I have a whole hour.
But actually, now, again, it's one of those things where, when you've watched it enough times, the first half scares me way more than the last act.
Yeah.
The Jack chasing them around with an axe is great fun. But to me, that's when I kind of am like, okay, whatever. We're into kind of almost slasher territory now.
I know this.
Yes,
it's a reassuring moment where but even then you don't know what she's going to see in each door. But when things go crazy, you feel okay.
Yes, the kind of the absolute kind of crescendo almost for me is the red rum moment, which is again absolutely terrifying in so many ways. And to me, that is the last moment, and then it kind of ends with that axe coming through the door, and almost to me that's a kind of and breathe.
Yeah,
this is really weird.
I'd never actually. That's one thing. I'd never been as bothered by the red rum thing.
I think it's just his voice.
It's the moment where it changes.
Yes.
Red rum. Red rum. Red rum. Red rum. Red rum. Red rum.
1 minute it's just a child putting on a voice.
Yes.
And then I'm not going to do it right here because you don't deserve that in your ears. But it goes into a certain whole new pitch.
Yes.
Where it sounds like it might be E.T.'s
Yes.
E.T.'s from hell relative.
Yes.
E.T. from hell
E.T. from
spills from his mouth.
Demonic.
Absolutely awful, which is when she wakes up and suddenly you're like, no, you need to stop that now because I was fine before. I understood what you were doing. I understand that it's murder, but great.
Yeah.
But then suddenly you go, no, now someone needs to wake up and put a hand. No, stop.
Yes. And again, that scene is so slow. He says it so many times, and it's like, okay, he goes over to the dresser, he picks up the lipstick, he picks, walks over
every
to the door.
letter.
He
so
writes
slow.
every letter, walks back over to. But to me, it is like I can't look away, and my heart is racing at that moment. And then it's just that moment in between him sort of saying it slowly and sort of deeply to him screaming it in his childlike voice. But there's that 1 or 2 in between red rums where they've done something to his voice.
Something is strange.
Yes,
something has gone
again,
very
it's the
wrong.
Uncanny thing.
Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
And again, it's the same with that famous bathroom door scene. It's slow. It's not like one burst through the door and he's there. It's like we watch him every single blow. It takes him like a good couple of minutes to hack his way through that door.
And I think the reason that it's so awful as well is because you've watched everything else. Everything else has been so methodical that if that axe met flesh, that it would be so much that you maybe couldn't cope.
Yes.
At that point, every swing, and you're like, I can't cope with that going through one of them because if it's anything like I've seen before, you're not going to cut. You're just going to leave me here watching this, and I don't think I can do it.
Exactly that. And it's that thing of, and we talked about this a bit on the podcast before, there are certain filmmakers that are just, you feel untrustworthy. You don't trust Stanley Kubrick. I had no idea, first time watching this, whether he might kill the wife and child.
Absolutely.
And it might end with that little boy chopped up with an axe. You just have no idea what's going to happen. And you feel unsafe the whole way through. It's unsafe scares, isn't it? That's the thing. Absolutely amazing. Let's talk a little bit about the ending then. That really ambiguous ending. So obviously you've got that incredible maze chase. You've got Jack, who's left frozen to death in the ice. That funny kind of shot where he's sort of there, sort of frozen in ice the next morning. And then we have that very slow kind of zoom in into that picture, which is from about 1922?
July 4th, 1920. Which also ties into the Native American because it wasn't Independence Day for everyone.
Oh, interesting. And there is Jack stood there at the front of this big group photo in a tuxedo. So what do you make of that?
I always feel like it's the hotel that's consumed him and it's just made him a part of its history.
Yes.
And that's what Grady's become.
Yes.
It's eaten. It's got what it wants. And it's still a hungry thing. It's taken a soul.
Yes.
It just didn't manage to get him to do everything else first.
Yeah.
Because it would always have not rewarded him, but it encouraged him.
Yeah.
He was already doing, it just gave him slightly more murderous thoughts. It was like, oh, off you pop, go and do this.
Yeah.
So it plays its games.
Yeah.
And then it consumes you and you become a part of its past.
Yes.
That's kind of my thing of you're taken, but you've always been there.
Yeah.
It's like you've always been the janitor.
Yeah.
It's like, but you've only been the janitor for like 2 months, but you've always been the janitor.
Yes. There's this kind of almost then you're stuck in this. Time doesn't mean anything once you're in that hotel.
Not in the
almost,
Overlook,
does it? Yeah. And that's I guess what like you say, what Grady is, what maybe the guy in the bear suit is. Yeah, all those characters are just people that at some point or other got stuck there or something. Yeah.
Because if you think about it, it's not a period piece as such.
No.
Overlook's quite timeless.
Yes.
It's a traditional hotel.
Yeah.
But we know there's phones and the radio, but it's not. We can happily watch it now, and at least we'd look at a car and go, that's quite dated, but that would be the only thing.
Exactly. Whether or not you'd call the kind of carpets and wallpaper sort of 70s-esque or not, I don't know what they are. They're almost otherworldly.
You'd say it would be of a design, and that would be it, but it doesn't have a...
No, it doesn't.
Because it's so far away from the rest of humanity, you can't, play it by anything. There's no one. There are reading books, but I think it's Catcher in the Rye. It's not of the time, you know. It's classics. There's a timelessness there, and The Overlook just eats that, and you just become part of its timeline.
Yeah. And you'd like to think that, you know, Shelley, Wendy and Danny get away and are happy.
Yes.
That's the kind of nice Stephen King ending there, where, you know, everyone, they live happily ever after.
They live happily ever after. They manage to get down. They definitely don't die of frostbite on the way down. No,
God.
Mike. I mean, Mike, they definitely don't run out of gas halfway down the mountain in the snowy. And they are definitely not uncovered in spring.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely not.
And that little boy definitely doesn't grow up to be some fucked up adult or something, you know. That's the other thing. I just think, God, you know. But there is actually a sequel book, isn't there?
Doctor Sleep.
Yes. Have you read it? I've not read it. How was it?
You know what? I liked it. I have a weakness for a lot of King, but I liked it because Danny did not grow up as, you know, as undamaged, because of course he didn't. But I definitely enjoy Doctor Sleep, and I'd like to read it again. After now I've restarted the book of The Shining.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
I had to.
I might have to go back to it.
I mean, King's writing, I can just read and read. Like, I read It again quite recently. I need to read that every couple of years.
Yeah.
Just because it's such a tome and amazing.
Yeah. It's just such a perfect and yet such a weird matchup, as it turns out, isn't it? Stephen King with Stanley Kubrick. You know, who'd have thought that creates such weird dissonance, bringing those two elements together.
I never saw King's version.
No, I haven't seen it either.
But
I've
King's
heard it's
version
terrible, but
did have a grown-up Danny graduating, as far as I remember.
I think it's a lot cheesier from what I've heard. You know, a lot more. You know, in some ways, a lot more Stephen King-y. Yeah. They do always have that slight cheese aspect to them, don't they? And he's famously said, you know, he loved Misery, the film. He thought Stand By Me was the best ever adaptation of one of his movies, of one of his books. So you can tell what Stephen King would like, you know, and what he wouldn't like.
Because although there's a horrific side to King, there is always that humanity, and there is always that heart. Always. Even when you're reading the scariest things.
Yes. I mean, he really knows how to sort of tap into fears and nightmares as well, doesn't he? He's very good at that on a storytelling level. And then Kubrick is so good at tapping into fears and nightmares on a cinematic level. That's the thing.
So they do mesh well that way.
They do mesh well, but in a weird kind of dysfunctional marriage almost, you know? It's like very, very odd.
They might send each other a Christmas card. Probably not.
Yes, exactly. Probably not. Stephen King, I wonder if he will ever, you know, come round or forgive Kubrick's film, you know. I wonder if he'll ever see, over the years, I wonder if he's kind of, you know, the amount that film has grown and grown to become basically, you know, often tops list as the best horror movie of all time.
It's its own thing. I think that's probably the thing as well, that he doesn't like the fact that, yes, it has elements, and yes, many of them are similar, and yes, it takes the same name, and but it is essentially not his.
No.
It's got a different... You know, it's like a changeling. It's like, that's not my child. You know, but it looks like it, but it's not.
It's the uncanny, isn't it?
It's not mine.
It looks like a Stephen King book, but
it's not. And I think it's maybe that lack of control, which he just can't see the truth of it, in that it's yours, but it's also his, and you can share.
Yes, absolutely. So do you think, I mean, this, again, banded around the greatest horror movie ever made, do you agree with that?
Oh God, that's such a... You can't just throw that at me. Is it the greatest horror film of all time? I think it's one of the greatest horror films of all time.
I think it is. I think I'd put it in the 5.
Yes.
The 4 or 5. If I had like a Mount Rushmore of 4 horror movies, I think it'd go in there.
Yeah. A Mount Rushmore would be good, because then you don't have to put anyone higher or lower.
No order.
Yeah.
But I think it would be on that shelf.
Yes.
It kind of has everything. Obviously, it is, I think, first and foremost a haunted house, but then it is psychological thriller. It's got slasher elements. It's got almost zombie-like The Woman in the Bathtub. You know, it's kind of throws everything at the wall as well, doesn't it?
And it all sticks in your brain.
Yes.
It's all al dente.
Yes,
all of it.
Exactly. Brilliant. Anything else you want to mention on The Shining before we wrap up?
I think we've covered everything.
Another moment I love, just to say, is Lloyd the barman. Is that scene?
Yes.
What a great scene.
Yeah, we didn't say anything.
Yeah.
The entire fact of, like, you know, also one thing I really liked is he had an empty wallet the first time, but the next time he went down, he had money in his wallet.
Yes.
And again, that was weird, because where would he have got the money?
Why would he have money? Where would he have got it? Yeah.
It's again that, and you going, you didn't have money before, but why do you have it now? Did you bring it to the bar?
Yeah.
Of no people?
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah. And that again, it's that scene is kind of like, okay, is this giving us the fact that he is actually just a crazy alcoholic father? You know, he kind of like, obviously he's kind of there at the empty bar going, oh, I need a beer, and then there's that like sudden like turn where he looks directly down the lens, and everything switches, and again, it's like, okay, are we in his head now or not?
And the confession of hurting Danny before, and it all literally spills out at that point. But that doesn't seem to bother.
No,
that doesn't bother the hotel. That feeds the hotel. The hotel likes that. It'll pour you another Jack Daniels. For that.
Exactly. Yeah, brilliant. Oh well, we could go on and on and on, but I won't keep you all night, Louise. Let me ask you then, which I ask everyone: do you have a favourite horror movie, and if so, what is it?
Oh, this is really difficult, Mike.
I know.
The Descent is one of my favourite horror movies. Amazing. Of all time. It might be on, it would also be on my Mount Horror more.
Yes, I think
The Descent would be on there.
You're right there. Yeah. I was talking about this with someone the other day, actually. It's like the closest thing that we've got this half of the, in the 21st century to movies like Alien or The Thing, all those like really well-made monster movies that are about more than just the monsters.
But I have been enjoying some serious guilty pleasures recently. I really enjoyed last year's Annabelle Creation.
Oh, yeah, I still haven't watched this yet.
Which literally is sitting there as one of my absolute guilty pleasures.
Yes.
I mean, really guilty. I mean, really properly guilty.
Well, no, I've heard good things. I've heard it's a lot better than the first one.
David F. Sandberg has made a good, scary film.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm going to check that one out. And what about the scariest movie for you then? What's the scariest film you've ever seen?
So found footage I tend to find really terrifying. So I remember when I saw the Blair Witch Project when I was 15, that terrified me. And since Paranormal Activity has also terrified me.
Yes.
With it's that kind of thing of, I know what it's like to go to the woods. I know what it's like to sleep in a bed. I know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night and not know what that noise was.
Yeah. 100%.
It's those fears.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. Just quickly, where can people find you if they want to find you on social media or stuff you've written or anything like that?
You can find my words on gamesradar.com, and you can find me on Twitter at shiny_demon.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my two guests, Louise Blain and Danny Leigh. Don't forget, if you want to find anything else that Louise or Danny write about or contribute towards, you can find their details in the show notes. So, what did you think of this week's show? What do you think of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining? Does The Shining really deserve this much discussion, or is it nothing more than a pretentious genre film? Who knows? Get in touch with us and let us know your views. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod, or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. If you want to join the discussion group, you can talk about The Shining and other movies we cover on the podcast with other listeners. You can find that group on Facebook. And don't forget, subscribe on Letterboxd if you want to keep up to date with what movies we're going to be covering over the next couple of months, in case you want to watch them in advance. And I did say I would give a big thank you to everyone who has so far left me a 5-star review on iTunes. These include Naomis Edwards, Camp Cropsey, Chiliel, Roland the Chain, P. Timmins, Zara Brooks, Niels 1973, Franklin D. Stallone, and Pastbury. Thank you so much to all of those people for your lovely comments and lovely reviews. And don't forget, if you haven't yet dropped me a little review on iTunes, please do. It's a really big help. It helps our podcast get put on the iTunes homepage, get discovered by new listeners, and it's also very lovely for me to read. So if you do drop me a review, I will give you a big thank you or a shout out next time. So, next week we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and we stay in the early 80s for 2 fantastic mainstream American ghost stories. And after the success of movies like Amityville and The Shining, the big hitting genre directors decided to jump on board and make their own scary ghost movies. So next week we're going to be discussing John Carpenter's The Fog from 1980 and Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist from 1982. Very, very exciting. So much to discuss. And next week, I'm joined by 2 different guests, each one to discuss a different movie with me. So returning to the podcast to discuss The Fog will be the brilliant movie trivia king, the one who tested me on slasher movies and made me look like an idiot last series, the brilliant Brian Ryan. And to join me to discuss The Poltergeist, I've got a brand new guest. She is a horror filmmaker. She's made brilliant movies such as the award-winning short film Nasty, the brilliant Prano Bailey Bond. Both of these wonderful people will be here to unpick these two iconic American ghost movies. So join me next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.